Hello, puppies and kittens. Welcome to another episode of Blasphemers Bible. And here I am sitting with my favoriteest reticulated python in the whole living room, Jormungandr. How do you do? I also want to congratulate Gutsit Gibbon on 100,000 subscribers. Fully deserved. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yep. And everybody else, I am so proud of my boy, Lawrence, who gave his first presentation this week as a biblical historian.
Well, I mean, the thing is, I'm still not, I don't have the degree yet and whatnot, and I've given some presentations before, but this one felt a lot more, it felt a lot better constructed because it's been so long since the last one, and because in the meantime I have, learned a good amount. So I did give a presentation on the origins of the Trinity, and apparently there was no way to view that online, unfortunately. But I do have a recording, and that is going to be premiered right after this show on my channel. So if you want to watch that, which you should want to watch that, obviously, if not, what the hell is wrong with you? You should go subscribe to Milwaukee Atheists. I'm going to watch that number tick up. I'm going to take out my phone and look at YouTube Studio and watch that number tick up. And if it doesn't, I'm banning Peter from the stream.
No, okay, I just posted the links. All I need is the link to the actual video, Lawrence. That would help.
Yeah. Here, I'll post it in the side chat here.
I got to tell you that there was a time when my own son criticized me because my ex was telling him how much I was wasting my time in all of this secularism thing. And he says, "Well, if it's not paying you any money, you're just wasting your time." And I said, "Well, it's funny that you should mention that right now because I've just been invited to go be the keynote speaker in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, where they're setting me up with in a hotel room and all of this. And I'm speaking at the James Randi Educational Foundation, and I'm going to be having dinner with James Randi. So what were you saying, son?"
Yeah, stuff like that. Like, because this was organized by a local group that I have worked with before. So it was basically like friends inviting me to do this. But I would love to, have like someone who had just been watching the content for a while, who had become really interested in the topic, to be like, hey, you seem to know a good bit about this stuff. Maybe you should do this speaking thing that I'm, some conference or some shit like that. That's the dream. That's what I'm shooting for. So
that was the first time that I'd ever done a public speaking thing, and I remember thinking that this is an educational foundation. This is a bunch of people with PhDs in science, and they're having me speak. And I was still an undergraduate at that point, so I had such a huge issue with imposter syndrome. But it went out very well. It worked very well. And Lawrence, I'm very, very proud of you. We couldn't. A lot of us were trying to figure out how to watch it and couldn't. So when the video comes out in a couple of hours, we'll all be eager to see it.
All right. Hopefully, I see people chatting away in there.
All right. So we are doing Joshua 8. Anybody have any opening comments on that?
That's the I.
Yeah. It's also this is where we were just at before, right? So
yeah.
The reason why last week I was like, hey, you know what? We should keep in mind the stuff that happened in Joshua 7 when we read Joshua 8, because it doesn't really make sense altogether. It's not exactly coherent. And then even within Joshua 8, there are coherency issues. Mm-hmm. So I'm very excited to get to it. This chapter is just filled with a good amount of contradictions, and with the scholarship around it, at least to me, it kind of seems like one of these stories that we're getting. It's probably a meld between two stories, right? A later one and perhaps an earlier one, but there might have been some source material that was actually used for this. So that's what we're gonna get to the bottom of today. Obviously, us here at Blasphemers Bible gonna get to the bottom of these things that have been complexing scholars for generations. We're gonna get to the bottom of it.
Yeah.
And Mark also, I think it's Mark of Apostate of Mind. I'm curious, do you have any forward information, opinion, or comments before we begin?
Yeah, thank you. I think we're about to step into some interesting grounds here where I'd love to hear what the panel has to say about Origen's interpretation of Joshua, which we sort of touched upon before.
Oh, yes, of course.
Hey, when you say Origen, you're talking about the Bible scholar Origen, who I've heard ridiculed a number of times.
Early church father.
Yeah,
third century, I think.
Yeah, I of course I have some of his opinions about Joshua 8.
Yeah. Specifically,
I would love to hear. I would love to hear the Israeli Jews in interpretation of the Christian Origins interpretation of this Hebrew Bible.
Oh.
Yeah.
And welcome back, Lilith. I'm glad to see that you could make it.
Thank you. Sorry, I family thing, had to switch a few things around. A few minutes late, but I'm here and I'm Bibled.
And I'm Bibled. Okay.
Well, you know.
Yes, and Mark, do invite me later on this week. We will definitely go and hang out, as you said. I'm so looking forward to that. Anybody that won't be as rude as the last brewery that we met that wouldn't let my snakes in the building. Yeah, we'll go have a beer. Hello.
For sure, they must be welcome.
A big old one-eyed bulldog just licked me in the nose. Yeah,
of course,
and bit my nose. All right, so who's reading today?
I can volunteer.
Yeah,
thank you, Mark.
All right.
Okay, read up to 17.
Up to 17. Okay. All right. I'll be reading from the JPS.
Me as well.
The Lord said to Joshua, "Do not be frightened or dismayed. Take all of the fighting troops with you. Go and march against Ai. See that I will deliver the king of Ai, his people, his deity, his city."
I have to say something. It's I, not AI.
Okay.
It would be more interesting if AI popped up in the Bible, but
yeah.
And
that would
get
prove its authenticity, all right.
Yeah, that's a good claim for prophecy.
Yeah. I mean, it'd be interesting if there was any I in the Bible, but never.
Oh, I get what dig you just made. Thank you. Or morality, either. That would be interesting.
All right. So, okay, picking up. See, I will deliver the king of Ai, his people, his city, and his land into your hands. You shall treat Ai and her king as you treated Jericho and her king. However, you may take the spoil and the cattle as booty for yourselves. Now set an ambush against the city behind it. So Joshua and all of the fighting troops prepared for the march on Ai. Joshua chose 30,000 men, valiant warriors, and sent them ahead by night. He instructed them as follows: "Mind, you are to lie in ambush behind the city. Don't stay too far from the city, and all of you will be on alert. I and all the troops with me will approach the city, and when they come out against us, as they did the first time, we will flee from them. They will come rushing after us until we've drawn them away from the city. They will think, they're fleeing from us the same way as last time. But while we're fleeing before them, you will dash out from your ambush and seize the city, and the Lord your God will deliver it into your hands. And when you take the city, set it on fire. Do as the Lord has commanded. Mind, I've given you your orders." Joshua then sent them off, and they proceeded to the ambush. They took up position between Ai and Bethel, west of Ai, while Joshua spent the night with the rest of the troops.
I want to jump in for a second. If I can. Does it bother anybody else that so much of this timeless word from God, creator of the universe, the entire uber-galactic cosmos, that his message, his timeless message for all people, only concerns trivial military conquests that are really wasteful and inefficient.
At least Lao Tzu told us he was writing military strategies. And honestly, given the situation they're in, this is not a bad military strategy. But I do have to say, remember in Genesis when I said dibs on the next genocide, we were debating reading order? Yeah, I can't really say that because for the next several books, that's going to be every fucking chapter.
Basically,
So.
yeah. I mean, once we get to Judges, oh boy, the genocides.
I
love it.
yeah.
I love it so much.
I love genocide so much.
Oh, well, he's very much like a godlike, a man after God's own heart, right?
See, this is that's so Judges has a lot of the it's the way that I think the Iliad should have ended, with more slaughter.
That's what the Bible lacks. It just doesn't have enough gore.
Well,
it'd be so much.
Well, you know, in every
sacrifice of a daughter to gain military victory, same thing.
Yeah, every fanciful book needs to end with a big battle.
Yeah, Joshua was like, we've had one genocide, yes, but what about second genocide?
What about ethnic cleansing?
Yeah, only this time we're gonna keep some for ourselves.
Right.
Yeah.
Enslavement of an entire culture. He knows about those, right?
Genocide and then breakfast.
All right, we should continue with the reading, though, probably.
Yes.
All right.
Please continue.
Okay. Early in the morning, Joshua mustered the troops. Then he and the elders of Israel marched upon Ai at the head of the troops. All of the fighting force was with him, advanced near the city and encamped to the north of Ai, with a hollow between them and Ai. He selected about 5,000 men and stationed them as an ambush between Bethel and Ai, west of the city. Thus, the main body of the army was disposed on the north of the city, but the far end of it was on the west. This was after Joshua had spent the night in the valley. When the king of Ai saw them...
Mark, I love it. I love it how we have the sound of the fighting force in the background. It's
like special effects, yes. All right, picking up on verse 14. When the king of Ai saw them, he and all his people, the inhabitants of the city, rushed out in the early morning to the meeting place, facing the Arabah, to engage the Israelites in battle, for he was unaware that a force was lying in ambush behind the city. Joshua and all Israel fled in the direction of the wilderness as though routed by them. All the troops in the city gathered to pursue them. Pursuing Joshua, they were drawn out of the city. Not a man was left in Ai or in Bethel who did not go after Israel. They left the city open while they pursued Israel.
So, of course, one big issue here is the number of troops that go.
Yeah.
So in 8:3, we are told that, what was it, 30,000 warriors are sent out, and they're the ones that are told to lie in ambush. But then I believe in verse 12, taking about 5,000 men, he set them in ambush between Bethel and Ai. So that's the first contradiction. But then we have to remember what happened in the last chapter, how initially they went into this place, right? And like it did say that they, eventually left, right? But it also said, okay, so he sent the men from Jericho to Ai. So they
he set these men a small force, and then they lost like 36 guys or something.
They only 36, right? And they made
which was a huge rout, and they just ran away screaming like Sir Robin, the not quite so brave as Sir Lancelot. 36 men out of 1,000 died. Oh my gosh!
Run away!
All right, so there's like no no reference to this like initial time that they kind of fucked it up or anything. But although in that passage or in that chapter, it does say that they had 3,000 men, I think.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So that is, so we can probably link those, right, as one narrative, or at least together. But yeah, so the first big issue is, of course, the number of people.
Yeah, the Rushies straight away is like, yeah, this is a second ambush that would, join the fight from behind rather than entering the city. But yes.
By the way, Lawrence, I just saw the thumbnail for your presentation that airs right after the show. I love the way that it looks like you're saying, "Are you fucking serious?"
Well, yeah, that is true. But I tried to make a very clickbaity thumbnail, so hopefully it goes over well for the algo.
The gods of the algorithm.
Yeah,
May they help.
Praise to the gods of the algorithm.
Yes. Sacrifice a ram stick and chant the ancient 01010010101010.
Yeah, that goes on for a while. Stop. All right. Do please continue, Mark.
Yeah, no, I have commentary.
I was just going to say,
Homer has commentary. Who knew?
You hasn't even started his commentary. Never mind, finished it. But with regard to the numbers, I mean, there is the caveat in the story that, we just need to send a small force against them. It'll be fine. And then, obviously they run away. And this, but yeah, if you're ever looking for contradictions in the Bible, the numbers are your solid go-to because they're never line up. Ever.
Yeah, it seems like a bit of an overreaction. Like, oh, we don't need a big force. We'll send in 3,000. Oh, that wasn't enough. Okay, we're gonna send in everyone with a trick, with 30,000 ambush and an extra 5,000 ambush, or maybe it's the same ambush but different traditions. Who knows?
Yeah. It's interesting actually to look at the breakdown of like where would all these different numbers have come from, because if this is the Deuteronomistic history, yet they're clearly not composing this all, they must have some sources, sometimes multiple sources. So like, where do those come from? That's a question I'd like to have answered. Oh, great scholar.
Yeah, one option would be like, okay, so since we have two occurrences of the 3,000 people, it's likely that would have been from either another source or that would have been the original, and then basically for the most part, all the in-between stuff would have been added later. That because especially with like the Synovicon, right? That sounds like a later addition to explain a few things. That sounds almost like an that's just an inserted ideological narrative is what that is, once you get to the Valley of Aqua, right? So we may be looking at like an initial section of the Deuteronomistic history in verses 10 through 29ish, I'm not sure, but then we have the addition kind of in between it was 7:2 through 5. So we have all the stuff in between that's been added for ideological purposes. But then it is really weird that we do have this addition that contradicts this older source. So you might be dealing with source material that is being copied, maybe two possible traditions, or we're just dealing with a straight up addition.
And people do become very attached to what they perceive as Holy Scripture, and you often have to fold it in, whether it's authentic or not. I always think of the story in the fourth gospel of the widow taken in adultery, and let he who is without sin cast a first stone. We've known for so goddamn long that was not in the original. So long. This is not news at all. But people won't take it out of the Bible. They have a deep attachment to it. It's been there a long time, and they're and it's not a terrible story of all the things that have been added to the Bible. It's probably one of the less crappy. So,
I just want to point out that Lawrence didn't have the wisdom to show his library behind him. He wanted to show the vast catacombs with the Minotaur that he lives with. So he keeps pulling books off of his shelf to show that he has these books that he's actually read. So,
Here's the thing, right? So half of my library is down here behind me. Well, that's not even half of it. That's like maybe a third of it. I have more books in a case over there, and then I have a bookshelf, whole bookcase upstairs. I need to get another one because I'm out of space. So,
how could you be out of space? You could have 2 more Minotaurs.
I was going to say, mighty fine.
I have no place to put my books. I have
I tell you sincerely, Lawrence's room, the one room in which he dwells, is the size of my whole fucking house.
No shot. No. I mean, no.
Plenty of room for snakes.
Yeah,
open concept living.
Yep.
I was gonna say before Tomer picks up on his commentary, the thing about numbers, and this doesn't speak directly to the issue at hand here, but I remember sitting through a lecture. I think it was maybe for the book of Numbers. The professor was sort of making a case. It was regarding like the numbers of Israelites in Egypt. Like, was it really 500,000 or whatever? And he was making the case that there's enough ambiguity in the numbering and the numbers, where sometimes thousands could be just tens, and so like whenever, and it's just funny how they're just unapologetic, in instances where it seems like maybe the numbers are too great for the situation, they can always sort of like, tweak the interpretation of numbers, which I don't know where he got it from, but it's just crazy how like they can just make up any excuse to make the Bible fit and not,
Oh my goodness. Oved is, I think, he obviously there's no scholarship or honesty or grounds in anything Oved ever says, but he has some of the most convoluted explanations for why the number of soldiers and horses and carriages and chariots just flip-flops in the middle of an army, in the middle of a battle, by 10, like just factors of 10. You're like, oh, we have 150 chariots. Oh, we have 1,500 chariots, and then back and forth, like just nothing.
It also might be related to was it in Numbers or in Exodus? I think it was in Exodus. Yeah, we talked about the idea of this not meaning people, this instead being family units. So the 30,000 might have been in extrapolation from what maybe this later editor would have seen as like, oh, it's 30,000. Sorry, it's 5,000 units. So that would be like, oh, I don't know, 30,000 people. So that might be an option as well.
That's possible, and I'm certain that squadrons were not quite so clearly delineated with how many would be in their number. So,
yeah, I think the word for 1,000 can also mean like a chief or something like that, or leader or group. So maybe that's where they got that, or at least it's similar, like aluf or whatever. So it's similar enough to the word that maybe there's a connection there.
Okay.
Oh yeah, one thing we didn't mention is just quickly is the 30,000 in this chapter ambush is sent the night before, and then the 5,000 is sent in the morning. So yeah, I guess you could read it as either 2 separate groups or 2 separate origins.
I mean, you could, but then you'd be kind of going over verse 4 there, where it says, with the command, you shall lie in ambush against the city. So like those are the ones that would lie in ambush, and then the next day it would be less people that were ambushing than have just been told to ambush.
Biblical morality, everyone. Mark?
Okay. I'm sorry.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. It's Tomer now. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so on verse 1, Butler comments, God changes the direction of the narrative, renewing the promise of deliverance with the call not to fear and to resume military activity, because this principal formula I have given into your hand is still valid, even after the Achan incident. Knauf uses the picture of Joshua as warrior to differentiate the basic narrative from editorial additions. Through to the final redaction, Joshua is pictured, according to Knauf, as one doing all of and only what God has ordered. This, however, paints too simplistic a picture of the complex figure of Joshua. He is throughout the book pictured as obedient minister of Moses, strong leader of the army, obedient follower of Yahweh, interpret and giver of Torah, and prophetic guide to the future.
Okay, so you make this. This is a reference to Narf from Pinky and the Brain. What?
Naufa.
Wow, that was a stretch.
That was really
Oh
strange.
my God, Aaron! Oh, where are my 90s babies at? Oh.
So on verse 2, Jericho and its king. The king of Jericho is not mentioned in chapter 6, but it can be assumed that he was killed, according to 621 and Kimchi. Butler writes that he is introduced here to underline the total obedience of Israel, considering the large role played by the king of Ai in this narrative. Septuagint does not mention a king. On you may carry off their plunder and livestock for yourselves. This goes in line with Deuteronomy 2, verses 34 to 35. The ban, cherem, is applied only to humans and not to livestock or spoil. Jericho was the exception, being the first Canaanite city to be conquered by the Israelites. And Dozeman comments, in the book of Joshua, the only acceptable booty for profane possession is the general spoil, in Hebrew shalash, and the animals, behemot. The same teaching on profane booty appears in Deuteronomy 2:35 and 3:7, where the execution of the ban on Sichon and Og allows only for general spoil and the animals as booty. All, quote, men, women, and children, end quote, are slaughtered, according to Deuteronomy 2:34. This teaching appears again in Deuteronomy 20, verses 16 to 18, which states that all humans who live in cities within the promised land must be destroyed under the ban, and that only general spoil and animals remain acceptable for private possession. Deuteronomy 20:14.
Oh, and just to in case it wasn't clear with the no reference to the king in the Septuagint, it's just the king of Ai. There is still the reference to the king of Jericho in the Septuagint.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Well, and the thing about the importance of killing the king of the land you conquer when God tells you to is something that we'll see later come up in the reign of Saul. That's actually, you're taught to sort of despise Saul because he lost God's favor because he didn't do what God said, which was actually just him trying to offer extra sacrifices to God and him not killing quite as many people as God told him to.
On that same verse, set an ambush behind the city. Zakovitch writes that this sentence does not align with verse 1. He thinks that this might have been an addition by a reader who felt the tension between the godly promise regarding conquering Ai and between the ambush trick employed by Joshua, and so he wished to attribute this initiative to God. On verse 3, 30,000, Ahituv writes that this number is highly exaggerated, as is the number of ambush people in verse 12, around 5,000 people, and the number of people who died in battle in verse 25, 12,000, all the people of Ai. Septuagint adds that Joshua sent them out by night. On verses 7 to 8, Dozeman notes that MT describes the total annihilation against Ai, and the people are commanded to dispossess the city, which is further defined as destruction by fire. Septuagint, however, eliminates the destruction of the city as a divine command, and states that the warriors must enter the city. Nelson writes that Septuagint lost "and Yahweh your God" and with fire due to an inner Greek haplography. According to verse 9, Joshua spent that night with the people. Rashi explains to be ready early in the morning. The clause is absent from the Septuagint and perhaps 4Q Joshua A. Nelson writes that MT expands to clarify that Joshua remained with the main army. On verse 10, the leaders of Israel, the Hebrew Bible reads, the elders of Israel, as in KJV and JPS. They were first mentioned in 7:6 when they mourned the loss at Ai. Ahituv writes that this is the only time when they are mentioning Joshua in the context of war. Septuagint and 4Q Joshua A omit of Israel. Nelson writes that the MT represents an expansion. On verses 11 to 13, Ahituv writes, These verses repeat what was said before verses 3 to 10, and it seems that these are parallel versions, even though they are not identical everywhere in the anywhere in the main version of the story. According to the main story, after Joshua sent the ambush at night and encamped in the night inside the valley, he and the elders went to Ai, leading the people. There is no need to repeat about the encampment of the people after it was told that they advanced to Ai. The wording of the writings is rough in several places and is not always sufficiently interpretable. It is possible that even within this section itself, there's a duplication between verses 12 to 13 and verse 13a.
I have to comment on the commentary, if I may, briefly. It's so it's sort of triggering and yet familiar to me to hear of, commentators trying to attribute something, he uses a strategy that's quite clever in the situation. It's a good war strategy. You've created an expectation, fulfill it, use it to ambush. And, the idea of, oh, well, we can't give Joshua any credit for that. That would mean that he was, winning by his own cleverness. And so we have to say that God told him to use this strategy, which is, reasonably intelligent, but not beyond the ken of mortal man. And it's so, I don't know if anyone else had this experience growing up in a religious community. There was very much that whole, oh, you have to give glory to God in everything. God gave you your gifts. God did God. You could never just say, I did a good job on that. I'm proud of that. Never. It was absolutely, how very dare you, vanity, all your works are filthy rags, yada, yada, yada. And it's just, ugh. And it doesn't surprise me at all to see it in the, supposedly scholarly commentary, the same trend, the same, nobody can be special or intelligent or do anything that, is remotely effective in the circumstances unless God spoon fed it to them and they're just robo dialing whatever he told them to do.
This is not commenting on what I said, right?
No. A little bit on what you said. The rabbis said, not like
Rashi.
No, I think.
yeah.
I'm also got a comment from Eric Wander, who says, I know Tomer will have a comment about this, but the city of Ai is mentioned in Nehemiah 7:32. It existed at the time of the Babylonian captivity.
Is it the same one?
I don't know of any other one. But I can pull up Nehemiah 7, but
that'd be interesting because it does say at the end, and then they built a pile and it's a ruin to this day.
Yeah, right, it's a ruin. Which
supports the Deuteronomistic history being written during the time of Josiah and around compiled, edited, put together, and the until this day being prior to the Babylonian exile, which obviously there's some of the stuff that we discussed as being priestly source that very obviously was written at least post the destruction of the first temple and carried away to Babylon.
By the way, in keeping in our tradition of naming our snakes after gods and angels and some such, because this is a Honduran milk snake, but it looks so much like a coral snake that we named her Cora L.
Oh.
I did want to say that and I'm sure Lawrence has already looked that up, perhaps. The reference is not exactly to the city. I think it's more like the people of AI. I'm sorry. That's just I think that's a Texas thing, so you'll have to forgive me.
Are we talking?
We've read the word AI enough times that's how we pronounce it now.
No, but in fairness, it may not say the
St.
city.
Augustine.
Yeah.
Crap like that.
Yeah, that's true. I've heard it both ways, like Augustine and Augustine, right? So when it comes to, let's see here. All right, so it was 32, right? Yeah, 732. So it looks like 732 is, they're talking about the men, right? But either way, it at the time this would have been written, on the return from exile, this would have been yeah, actually, hold on. This oh yeah, this looks like it's part of another account. The list of exiles who returned, and then it gives a list of the men of Israel, and it says that the men of Bethlehem and Netopha, and then it continues on through a few others. But yeah, it numbers these men from. Looks like these are the ones that are returning to exile, returning from exile. Peter. So I guess this. So if a section, right? Okay, so let's take it this way. Yeah, so these are people who were returning, but I guess knew that they were still of the people of, like, they would still have been living in Ai at one point in time, right? So before the exile, and then so like still then maybe maybe this part would have been written like during the exile, and then we have these people who returned saying that in Nehemiah saying like, yeah, we were once part of this place before it was destroyed. But I'm not sure if the archaeological evidence for that history of Ai would stand. I'm not sure. For that one, you definitely first need to look at the archaeological evidence to see when it was actually like destroyed and stuff. So I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'd have to check.
Okay, I'll continue on verse 11. They set up camp north of Ai and with the valley between them and the city. This clause is omitted from the Septuagint. Zakovitch proposed that this is a case of homo euteliuton. A copyist skipped the word the city, Hebrew ha'il, from before the missing clause to the word ha'ai at the end of the verse. According to the Septuagint, they came opposite the city to the east. Nelson writes that this was to put the two troops contingents on opposite sides of Ai. On verse 12, according to verse 3, there were 30,000 people for ambush. Rashi comments, one ambush contingent following the other, each approaching nearer to the city than its fellow. Dozeman notes that Wellhausen thought that the version of the ambush with 5,000 warriors is the more realistic, and thus the original account. But Knox proposed that this version is a secondary addition, a variant of the original story that is framed by resumptive repetition in verses 9b and 13b. The phrase in the Septuagint is shorter, quote, and the ambush of the city was at the sea, end quote. On verse 13, that night Joshua went into the valley. This reading is absent from the Septuagint. Nelson writes that the MT reading is an expansion, which may have suffered an early corruption. He notes that some Hebrew manuscripts read Vayalen, and he spent the night, instead of Vayelech, he went, on the basis of verse 9. He writes that MT expansions in verses 9 and 13 emphasize the timetable by explicitly reporting the nights that preceded the mornings of verses 10 and 14. Butler, however, notes Barthelemy's opinion that MT is original, showing statistics on Septuagint omissions.
It strikes me that it's a small thing, but there's this idea of the general who stays with the troops in the field during time of struggle and doesn't, go off and have nice fancy accommodations for himself, that's a virtue in leadership. And I know in the story, Uriah the Hittite refuses to go to his home because, the fellow soldiers are struggling in the camp or whatever. Although that might have been just a case of, I'm not going to let you pretend you pulled the wool over my eyes.
Hold on. I'm not sure, Tomer. Did you mention this? I was reading over a note and then I had to check something. So there was apparently the Greek, because we are dealing with like this contradiction, right, in the number of people, and it looks like the Greek in verse 12 just eliminates the number of people.
Yeah, it's short. Verse 12 shortens it, but I referred to verse 13.
Right, yeah. Verse 13 as well is just a
it omits from
in there.
Yeah, that's one.
It's one way to get rid of the contradiction. No numbers.
Yeah. Okay, on verse 14, a certain place overlooking the Araba. In Hebrew, Lamoed Lifnei Ha'araba. The word moed is usually understood as an appointed time. Sinitagum, Rashi, Kimchi, and Dozeman, but some commentators like Isaiah Titrani, Nelson, and Butler read at the meeting point or the assembly place. Zakovitch proposed correcting moed to morad, of the descent, as seen in Joshua 7:5. And Dozeman comments, the Septuagint may have reinterpreted the term with the phrase ep eutheas, which describes the battle formation of the king as either meeting the Israelites in a straight line or emphasizing the urgency of their meeting in haste or immediately. Van der Meer writes, it is unclear what is meant with the appointment, since the logic of the narrative excludes the possibility that the Israelites and the inhabitants of Ai had made an appointment where to meet for battle. End quote. Wellhausen resolves the problem by interpreting moed as dusk. It may be that the MT use of moed is intended to signify the cultic character of the conflict. For example, Genesis 1:14, Numbers 10:10, Leviticus 23:2, thus underscoring the holy war quality of the battle, which is absent in the Septuagint.
Wait, so
And
the whole city went out to the assembly point? So did Joshua send in a spy to like pull the fire alarm in Ai and get them to leave?
Oh, no, obviously, he sent them a fruit basket with a nicely monogrammed note. If you wouldn't mind, we'd ever so much love if you'd come out and let us ambush you on this date at this time. Tea and crumpets to follow. Love and
Please
kisses,
RSVP.
Joshua. Yes.
Yeah. And my final comment on verse 17, Bethel. Dozeman writes that the mentioning of Bethel is unexpected, quote unquote, and is absent from the Septuagint. Butler writes that this is an amplification, making the conquest complete, considering contextual references to Bethel, as seen in verses 9:12 and Joshua 7:2. The notices in 12:9 and 16, and the greater importance of Bethel in later tradition. Ahituv writes that this is an addition Ahituv writes that this addition is possibly to amplify the calling of the pursue, that not only the people of Ai participated in it.
Wouldn't they run into the ambush? The ambush was between Bethel and Ai.
Was he referring to the first route? Because the first time they came against I just routed them and they ran away, but I might have called on a neighbor for troops, whereas this one, presumably, they were like, you're back for some more, eh?
Well, it kind of sounds like, because I would think that Bethel there would be a later tradition, because to me it would feel like, or a later addition, because Bethel, being this place of great apostasy, right? I feel like, because it doesn't exist in one manuscript tradition, is probably because I can definitely see a reason to add it, but I don't see a reason to delete it. So the reason that it would be to add it would be to say, oh well, they were cleared out too. All those idiots over there in Bethel, just so they know their place, right? Because it was one of the places where one of the golden calves was set up by Jeroboam. So
right.
Yeah, so I could definitely see a reason why someone would add in Bethel, but I don't see why it would be taken out.
That makes
Plus,
a lot
it
of
doesn't appear like, aside from being next to it, it doesn't. There's not really
from a military perspective. It doesn't make sense. Like their ambush was between Bethel and Ai. They were drawing them away from Ai. If the people from Bethel were to come past,
they'd be fucked.
They haven't started the ambush yet.
I should also note, Mark mentioned origin, and so there was one comment that he gave that caught my eye in homilies on Joshua 8:2. But perhaps you say to me, in what manner are the people in front placed as though fleeing? In a most suitable manner. For truly, those who follow Jesus seem to flee from legal burdens and precepts, from the observation of the Sabbath, from the circumcision of the flesh, and from cutting the throats of enemies. But on the other hand, the one who has followed Christ, the fulfillment and fullness of the law, does not flee.
Are we saying that Christians cut the throats of their enemies, or that they flee from the command to cut the throats of their enemies? And also, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Yeah, I get a clear sense that the way they're seeing is they're looking at Christ in two ways. They're looking at Christ like a second Moses, in the sense that he kind of brought this new teaching and he was a prophet, but Moses didn't really do the conquering. Joshua did, and they know that Christianity didn't do any conquering of anything, and so guess what, right? It's for the second coming, right? It was never meant to be, and that's how they see Joshua. And so when we think about that, if that's how they see Christ as a second Joshua in that sense, then the expectation is that he will be this bloodthirsty military leader when he comes back.
Right, of course. He was all nice the first time, which is why he'll come back and kick ass.
Mm-hmm.
I got a couple comments to read. Eric Wander offered 1 RN Raw membership, and then somebody using a Japanese name that, of course, I can't pronounce because I'm stupid.
Isaac already helped you.
Yeah. Says, will Aaron adopt a large cobra snake one day or a nice green anaconda? No, my wife is terrified of the green anacondas and also the real cobras. The snake I just put up moments ago was a false cobra, and there was somebody from India. I took one of these snakes out to a local beer club or a local craft beer place, and this woman from India was freaking out because she thought it was a real cobra. No, it's a false cobra. She goes, but it looks like a cobra. Yeah, I know. That's why they're called that.
Hence false cobra.
Yep. And then it saes
no, that's Isaac.
Isaac asked if I can read your username.
No.
God. That Japanese username. He was like, you can read this username as internet user. He already helped you.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's what it says.
All right.
User.
Do please continue as I try to catch up.
Yeah, I finished my commentary, so you can continue reading.
Oh yes. Okay, so now we've finished Joshua 8. Yes.
No. It's 18.
You said you finished your
my commentary for this part. That's what I meant.
We still have like
for this
verse
part.
17.
This part. Okay. 1 to 17.
Yeah, it's a bit of a mishmash chapter.
Okay.
Thank you, Peter.
So, Mark, somebody wake up Mark.
He's awake.
He's got to read again.
Actually, yeah, Tomer, right? Tomer, you're going to finish up?
I finished the commentary for this part.
Okay. All right, here we go. The Lord then said to Joshua, hold out the javelin in your hand toward Ai, for I will deliver it into your hands. So Joshua held out the javelin in his hand toward the city. As soon as he held out his hand, the ambush came out, rushing out of their station. They entered the city and captured it, and they swiftly set fire to the city. The men of Ai looked back and saw the smoke of the city rising to the sky. They had no room for flight in any direction. The people who'd been fleeing to the wilderness now became the pursuers. For when Joshua and all Israel saw that the ambush had captured the city and that the smoke was rising from the city, they turned around and attacked the men of Ai. Now the other Israelites were coming out of the city against them, so that they were between two bodies of Israelites, one on each side of them. They were slaughtered, so that no one escaped or got away. The king of Ai was taken alive and brought to Joshua. When Israel
the Bible says that no one escaped or got away. What are the options there? Escaped or got away? They didn't get away and they didn't escape?
No, sucks for them.
Sorry, go ahead.
For sure. When Israel had killed all the inhabitants of Ai who had pursued them into the open wilderness, and all of them, to the last man, had fallen by the sword, all the Israelites turned back to Ai and put it to the sword. The total of those who fell that day, men and women, the entire population of Ai, came to 12,000. Joshua did not draw back the hand with which he held out his javelin until all the inhabitants of Ai had been exterminated. However, the Israelites took the cattle and the spoil of the city as their booty in accordance with the instructions that the Lord had given to Joshua. Then Joshua burned down Ai and turned it into a mound of ruins for all the time and desolation to this day. And the king of Ai was impaled on a stake until the evening. At sunset, Joshua had the corpse taken down from the stake, and it was left lying at the entrance of the city gate. They raised a great heap of stones over it, which there is to this day.
So just think about this for a moment. I mean, this is God. This is the guy who created every world in the cosmos. He's created every planet, every civilization, everywhere. He's created all of us. He's created every civilization on this earth, certainly. And yet, we still have this petty situation where we have people standing in line because they're forced to stand in line to wait for some asshole to drive the sword through them. For what reason? Because they were born in the wrong part of the country, or because they didn't believe the right set of lies? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
So I think the big thing about the oh wait, are we going to continue the reading, or are we?
Yeah.
We can until you're, unless you have commentary.
I mean, because we were kind of changing subject, so I was gonna, but that's fine. If we want to go to the end of the chapter, we can go to the end of the chapter.
Yeah, finish the reading first.
Okay. All right, picking up on verse 30. At that time, Joshua built an altar.
Maybe it's a good place to break, though. Because it is like the end of the story of Ai, and then this is like slightly different.
Yeah, but just to keep the pacing.
Okay.
Okay. At that time, Joshua built an altar to the Lord, the God of Israel, on Mount Ebal, or is it Ebal?
Ebal,
Ebal.
whatever.
As Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded the Israelites, as is written in the book of the teaching of Moses, an altar of unhewn stone upon which no iron had been wielded. They offered on it burnt offerings to the Lord and brought sacrifices of well-being. And there, on the stones, he inscribed a copy of the teaching that Moses had written for the Israelites. All Israel, stranger and citizen alike, with their elders, officials, and magistrates, stood on either side of the ark, facing the Levitical priests who carried the ark of the Lord's covenant. Half of them faced Mount Gerizim, and half of them faced Mount Ebal. As Moses, the servant of the Lord, had
hold on just a second. Half of them faced Mount Gerizim.
Gerizim, Aaron.
Yeah, that's the holy mountain for the Samaritans.
Yes, which we've already noted previously.
And they're like both little. They're next to one another, aren't they?
Yeah, apparently. Yeah.
Okay. All right. After
Either
that.
way, we're weaving everyone's religious traditions into the story so that everybody can be included, so that we can all be part of the people who God promised the land to, so we can come back and genocide again. Yay!
Yeah. And I'm not so worried about Mount Gerizim as I am about Mount Nepal.
Aaron, don't anger me, please.
Don't. Tomer just said, "Don't anger me, please."
Oh
my gosh, that's inviting.
Oh, do not invite the wrath of the Tomer.
You wouldn't like me when I'm angry. Pulls out Hebrew commentary.
I'm strangely curious, but I'm going to be respectful.
We need a Jewish Hulk.
Yeah, finish the reading.
Picking up in the middle of 33. As Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded them of old, in order to bless the people of Israel. After that, he read all the words of the teaching, the blessing and the curse, just as is written in the book of the teaching. There was not a word of all that Moses had commanded that Joshua failed to read in the presence of the entire assembly of Israel, including the women and children and the strangers who accompanied them.
Sure, Jan.
Yeah, so I guess one of my cat has just been fucking meowing at me. So before I go deal with whatever the hell he wants, I just wanted to note the sword that's being used here, or the sword, or I think your translation had it as javelin.
Javelin, yeah. I have a
It's
comment on
sometimes
this
been
as well.
yeah, it's been understood as like a scimitar or something.
Yeah.
But the SBL Study Bible notes that the word kidon, right?
Yes, kidon.
Yeah, so he holds it high as Lord commands. This is potentially this is the sickle-shaped sword depicted in Mesopotamian and Egyptian art as a symbol of sovereignty. Joshua's brandished sword calls out the ambush party to attack. Yeah, so it may have been based on the weapon of, well, it would have been based on the weapon of that region, Mesopotamia at least.
I just love how he's totally pretending that the Code of Hammurabi, putting it all on the stone stele, it was totally our idea to conquer a city and then put our law in a stone there. That's totally us. We did it first. Shut up.
Do you want me to start a commentary or I see some comment?
I
well,
do
I
have
wouldn't want
something
to
to
anger
say.
you.
Oh,
So
Something briefly here from the description of what's happening here, where the priests line up a certain way facing Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal. There's a current there's an archaeologist, Striplin, out there, who I don't know if you've heard of the Mount Ebal or Mount Ebal inscription that he's peddling.
Yeah. I know the other one is Gershon Galil, but the name of the other person I can't remember.
Yeah, Striplin is the main evangelical scholar that's doing the publication and whatnot. And this is based on an archaeological find that's out there in Mount Ebal, but it sits on the opposite side, on the northeast side of the mountain, where you couldn't possibly see Mount Gerizim. And so that's why there's all the speculation as to whether or not that is the actual temple that's described here, the altar, I'm sorry, where that cursed tablet may have come from. And so, but in spite of like the geography that, just refutes that claim altogether, it precludes the claim because of the geography. They're still insisting on it, that it's genuine and whatnot. And so I'm going to be doing an episode on the Apostate of Mind podcast about it. But yeah, it's so crazy how they just want to keep on insisting that, the archaeology, is there to corroborate some of these historical events.
Give me a moment, if you wouldn't, Mark. And you said you were going to be doing a podcast about this. Promote your channel.
Sure, yeah. So, Positive Mind, please visit me. I'm on YouTube, and essentially, I'm an ex-pastor who learned enough to realize that I didn't know what the hell I was believing when I was in seminary, and learned my way out of a job. And so I quit ministry. I quit pursuing that life, and then eventually became I'm an atheist now, and so I'm on YouTube, where I do mostly anti-apologetic stuff. And so I like to comment on other apologists that are putting out BS claims, and I refute their claims. And if they want to use the Bible and all that, then I'm like, let's talk about the Bible, and then let's see what it really does say. And that's the kind of thing I do. So
brilliant. We got a comment from Eric Wander, who says, why do we even go to war if God can deliver any army? What is the point of going to war? Laughing out loud, I guess Sky Daddy wanted to see some gore for entertainment.
They say there's no human sacrifice in the Bible.
I don't know what they're smoking, but they clearly haven't read 90% of it. Also, I feel like we're forgetting that what we are is God's reality TV show, and God is a petty bitch.
Okay, I'll start my commentary. Verse 18, hold out toward I the javelin that is in your hand. Traditionally, the word kidon has been read as javelin or spear, as in the Septuagint, Peshitta, Targum, Rashi, and BDB Dictionary. Modern commentators, however, translate to sword, with some, like Nelson and Bolling, suggesting a curved or crescent-shaped sword, i.e., a sickle sword or a scimitar. Syriac 46:2, in a eulogy to Joshua, reads, "How glorious he was when he lifted his hands and brandished his sword," in Hebrew kidon, "against the cities." In War Scroll 512, kidon is a double-edged sword. Vulgate describes it as a shield, interestingly enough. Zakovitch comments, "The writing brings to mind the event during the war on Amalek, where Moses stood with God's staff in his hand." Exodus 17:9. Joshua fulfills a role in that story. He stands at the head of those who fought Amalek. The staff has a miraculous role, as in verse 11 there. The difference between the tools used by both leaders is that the staff was used to create miracles to Israel, whilst the javelin, a war tool, is in the hand of Joshua from the situation. On verse 20, they had no chance to escape in any direction. The Hebrew Bible literally reads, they had no hands to flee. The word yadayim, hands, could be understood as either strength, as in Vulgate, Targum, Rashi, Butler, Dozeman, and Zakovitch, and thus they had no strength to flee, and thus they had no strength to flee. Or it can designate a place, as in the Septuagint, Peshitta, Kimchi, Ibn Kaspi, Ahituv, and Nelson. Thus, they had nowhere to flee. On that same verse, the Israelites who had been fleeing turned back against their pursuers. This clause is absent from the Septuagint. Nelson proposed either an MT anticipatory expansion, or a deliberate Septuagint omission to create a more coherent narrative. Zakovitch writes that Septuagint wishes to avoid a doublet. On verse 22, Butler writes that verse 22 is complicated and obscure. He writes that the reader must picture a storyteller pointing to one group and then another to understand precisely who is involved. The new group here is apparently the ambushers returning from Ai and joining in the fray against the retreating enemy. On verse 24, in the wilderness, Dozeman writes that the MT reference to the wilderness is not clear. Septuagint has on the mountain at the descent, which picks up the motive from Joshua 7:5. Nelson writes in the open country on the slope, writing that MT in the wilderness stems from misreading and transposing the letters of the more difficult original Bemorad, and the Septuagint mountain must be an expansion or gloss. On that same verse, when they were all fallen on the edge of the sword. I'm reading from the KJV. This is omitted from the Septuagint. Zakovitch writes that these words duplicate the closing sentence of the verse and smote it with the edge of the sword. Butler, however, notes van der Meer's opinion that the Septuagint's omission is to avoid the duplication. On verse 26, this verse is absent from the Septuagint. Nelson proposed that there is an instance of homo eoteleuton from the population of Ai at the end of verse 25 in the Septuagint to the population of Ai at the end of verse 26. Butler writes that Septuagint saw verse 26 as a doublet to verse 24b. He notes van der Meer's opinion that Septuagint saw sword as a signal to ambush only, and thus was not needed once ambush was called up, and thus deleted verse 26. Zakovitch, however, proposed that Septuagint is original. He writes that according to the verse, holding out the javelin was not intended as a sign for the ambush, but serves as an act that must continue until the fighting ends, just like Moses did during the battle against Amalek. This addition, which interrupts the flow from the number of those killed in verse 25 to the booty in verse 27, compares Joshua's character to that of Moses and gives the event a miraculous background.
Yeah, it does feel more like an insertion. Yeah. But by the way, all of these bits where the Septuagint doesn't have stuff, do Christian Bibles also don't have it, or did they add them back in?
So it depends on the textual tradition and what each translator is doing. So I'm not sure what it would be because I don't have a KJV on me. The KJV was based on the Textus Receptus. the received text, essentially. That was whatever text they had gotten from the textual tradition that they had gotten it from. I don't know. And there are a few different manuscripts that kind of go into it, but that has its own textual tradition. And then when you talk about other translations, it is like they still have textual critics that are doing the job of criticizing the text and translating, coming up with what is likely original. But very often in those translations, you'll find the issue is mostly because you know how all translations are interpretations. They will often interpret it and translate it in a way that fits whatever sect they're a part of. So for like uncritical translations, they're generally gonna do it like that, unless there's like some obvious textual difference where they're like, okay, we are translating it this way, but it's important to note that many texts like don't include this or do include this other thing or whatever. And it's different from translation to translation.
What I have found in my own studies is that when it comes to the New Testament, though, it gets a little interesting because when they do quote the Old Testament, they almost always are quoting from the Septuagint. And in those cases, they don't take into account the Masoretic text sometimes, even, which is, it's like it's convenient for the New Testament authors to just quote the Septuagint, and it's so clear that it's a Christian bias that's all behind it.
Well, the thing is it convenient, or is that what they had access to? Did they just have access to a Septuagint, and that's what they thought was like, that was the scripture?
Right, but the translators don't take into account how the verses might look like in the Masoretic text, because they're saying, well, I'm not gonna correct the Apostle Paul, or I'm not gonna correct, the author of Matthew, because, this is inspired, and so that's where I feel like they're not really doing academic.
Well, like I think a lot of like commentaries certainly do that justice, but when it comes to like normal translations, I feel like the reason they're not like adding or changing the verse to match what it is in the Masoretic or whatever the original might have been, it's because the authors of the New Testament texts didn't have that, so they wouldn't have quoted it. They had the text.
Yeah, I guess it's evidence to show that the writers of the Gospels, for example, were, they knew Greek and they could read the Septuagint.
Right.
But not necessarily did they
not only
actually
that
know
they
how
knew
to
Greek,
read.
not only that they knew Greek, but that they were using the Greek Septuagint as their primary source.
Yeah.
There's no reason to believe
they might not have been able to.
Hebrew.
Yeah.
Okay, on verse 29, he impaled the body of the king of Ai on a pole. The Hebrew Bible reads, and he hanged him on a tree. Septuagint clarifies that it was a forked tree, which, according to Dozeman, suggests some form of gallows. He notes Van der Meer's opinion that Septuagint, quote, probably reflects an expansion introduced by the Greek translator to underline this specific type of punishment, end quote. He also notes that Origen transforms the imagery of gallows and crucifixion to provide commentary on the crucifixion of Jesus. And Butler writes, Israel carries out the execution of the king according to the law in Deuteronomy 21, verses 22 and 23. The people have learned their lesson. They will not defile the land Yahweh is giving them. Israel knows the consequences. In executing the king, Israel follows both Torah and custom, for ancient Near Eastern armies treated kings in the same manner Joshua treated the king of Ai. Victory brings Israel away from the periphery of the land on the Jordan River to the center of the Central Hill country. The conquest is becoming a reality.
I was wondering about these to this day, these mounds. This seems to me like here is an existing ruin. I think Ai has been associated with a specific ruin in Israel now. I think, Comment, did you mention it at one point? You said that there was like a tail or something.
Maybe in
there was
7?
the comment earlier about in Nehemiah, how some of the exiles returned saying that they were, from Ai, and they would have been obviously Jews who had lived in Ai, rebuilt later from this. But then that puts the unto this day, in between.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if there is, here is a ruin, here's a particularly large mound near the edge, which might have been a tower or something, but they decided, okay, that's where the king was buried, and like it made the story kind of match the ruins that they could see in the land. It's like,
I
it's
imagine
like
they
the
would have
fairies
asked for
built
local
Stonehenge or
legends
whatever.
too, but
Oh, and speaking of origin, there is a comment by him in homilies on Joshua 8:7, which is a bit anti-Semitic, but a bit in yeah, but there is an interesting bit there. So when the Jews read these things, they become cruel and thirst after human blood, thinking that even holy persons so struck those who were living in Ai that not one of them was left who might be saved or who might escape. They do not understand that mysteries are dimly shadowed in these words, and that they more truly indicate to us that we ought not to leave any of those demons deeply within, whose dwelling place is chaos and who rule in the abyss, but to destroy them all. We slay demons, but we do not annihilate their essence, for their work and endeavor is to cause persons to sin. If we sin, they have life, but if we do not sin, they are destroyed. Therefore, all holy persons kill the inhabitants of Ai. They both annihilate and do not release any of them. These are doubtless those who guard their heart with all diligence, so that evil thoughts do not proceed from it, and those who heed their mouth, so that no evil word proceeds from it. Not to leave any who flee means this: when no evil word escapes them.
Okay, I got a couple of questions for you, Tomer. I don't mean
Yeah.
to challenge your assumption that this was mildly, possibly, could be possibly interpreted as anti-Semitic. I just want to know, in your thirst for blood, do you also have an aversion for garlic?
Well, I do love me some garlic. So
okay, so we're cool. He's
so,
not a vampire.
He's not a vampire. Well, that's important. Yeah, you get the extra garlic hummus, and that's how you weed out the Jewish vampires.
Isaac, how do you feel about garlic?
That's only Mediterranean Christian vampires. Jewish vampires, I have no problem with garlic or crosses.
He's dodging the question, guys.
Vampire. Yeah, I have to say, look, absolutely, this is a bloodthirsty text, and absolutely in the history of religion, including exceptionally recent history, Jewish people have used it as a justification for actions that should not have been justified. But you know who else did that? All of freaking Christian history. The sacking of Byzantium, the Crusades, the fucking pogroms, the witch hunts, that every fucking war ever happened in Europe, plus all the Crusaders that went to the everybody. They did everybody. Who the fuck was that crazy Spanish bastard who just mutilated all the indigenous tribes? Not Columbus, the other one. The one who
say, like, which one?
And to add to your list, the post-Reagan Republican Party.
Oh, well, they're still going. Like I said, they're Jewish religious people will still do that. Christian religious people are still doing it. Absolutely. It's awful. It's terrible. That's why the version that you are, the eternal word of God for all time is so goddamn stupid and an incredibly harmful idea. If you look at this as a historical text, oh, look, an ancient people went to war a lot. No shit, Sherlock. Cool. If you
got a couple of comments.
If you worship
I got a couple of comments to read.
A lot of people die.
Trevor Wright says the Levant, in relation to Joshua's role in this region in this time period, to what extent is the historical and to what extent is the fiction in the Septuagint compared to the Masoretic?
Well, the thing is, it's not like super different. But when it comes to how much is historical and how much is fiction, we have to remember that like historiography was an entirely different thing back then. Like they didn't make the same distinction that we do between like, oh, here's fact and here's fiction, here's myth and here's history. Like they didn't do that. So when it comes to what's fictitious and what's historical, they're trying to explain historical realities at the time that they are writing through writing this mythic history. So you have like probably mythical characters like Joshua, kind of be the baseline to explain many of the real things that they were seeing in their times.
Yeah, I mean, I would say for both the Masoretic and Septuagint, regardless of any differences, the story of Joshua is fictional, and like, yeah.
And I personally find it very suspicious when the Septuagint leaves out information that it's obviously, controversial.
Well, that is one thing, right? But then we have to wonder. So, because our Septuagint text is older than our Masoretic text, maybe something was lost through the Hebrew transmission. So there are times when the Septuagint probably maintains the original reading, and there are times when the Masoretic text probably maintains the original reading. So it's a very verse by verse basis, and then we have to like compare it to like the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Dead Sea Scrolls,
yeah. The original Septuagint wasn't a Christian thing. It was
still Jewish.
It was a Jewish text. I mean, I don't think our oldest Septuagint manuscript. I think that one is a Christian manuscript.
It was translated in Alexandria by Jews, Jewish scholars.
Yeah.
But it's the basis of Christianity is 100% written out of the Septuagint. Like there's no Hebrew sources used by the writers of any part of the New
Wasn't
Testament.
it just for the first 5 books of Moses? and then the rest of them, it's sort of like we don't really know exactly when they came.
Well, I mean, wait, hold on. Are we talking about like when they were translated into the Greek?
The original Septuagint might have been just the first 5 books. It's possible, but there was definitely
it was written in sections. That is
the
true.
whole bit was it was all translated by the time of the Gospels were written. There were established Greek translations.
It started being translated into Greek around 300 BCE. And then
I think there's a story in the Talmud about so there was like these 72 rabbis were picked to translate to translate it into Greek.
That's where we get the name Septuagint.
Yeah, and the leaders of the Egyptians or whatever, they made them sit in separate rooms so that they couldn't copy from each other. So they wouldn't. They would all translate it word for word, like they would translate it from the Hebrew directly without trying to make any changes.
I think it's like the 4th time you mentioned this.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Well, not today, but in the course of we have definitely mentioned it at some point. If any of us had the patience to actually sit down and listen to the entire playlist.
I wish I could remember what they were. So the Jewish tradition is that there were a few changes that they miraculously all made.
Right, which meant it was divine intervention and not corruption of the source material, because
it wasn't corruption. The idea is that the Septuagint is corrupted by these changes, but those changes were done on purpose so that the Gentiles would have a either it was to make them not like kill the Jews or whatever. Like as a sort of self-censorship, or it was like, oh, these are secrets or something. I don't remember exactly. But it's only like certain minor things, like I think one of them is like to do with like God's oneness, like in the literal Hebrew it's plural, and in the Greek it's singular or something, I don't know, something like that. Yeah. Or even like in the beginning, right? Because if you were to translate it word for word into Greek, it would kind of imply that in the beginning God was created or something like that.
Yeah, like in the Hebrew it would be like when God created such and such, but then in the Greek it's in the beginning.
Yeah. Has more gravitas.
Yes, in the beginning, we didn't know what the fuck. So we said, I don't know, therefore magic. All right, so we got another comment from Matt White who says, Tomer, to clarify, the word JWs, Jehovah's Witnesses, translate as stake when talking about the crucifixion is different from the word used here for the king of eyes. I'm calling anything about saying artificial intelligence. The king of eyes impaling disgust. Wait, so let me say that again. Is different from the word used here for the king of eyes impaling discussed here. Yes, no?
Well, the word literally is "it's." The word means tree, but if you want, you
Yes,
can
hanging on a tree
read
as well.
as yes, but you can read it like as stake. But if you want to read it literally, it means tree.
Yeah.
I
think the
should
idea is
clarify
like, yeah,
here. The Jehovah's Witnesses have really they became obsessed with this really funny thing about pretending that Jesus didn't die on a cross, that he died on a torture stake. So they edit all of their text of the Bible to read torture stake, and they visualize him as being crucified like so. You know,
the fuck is
hands.
a torture stake?
Well, you do the same thing as crucifixion, but both hands above your head like so, just the same as the feet. Because reasons. They had to be different and special. So then they edited everything in the text to try and pretend that was totally what was going on.
I remember reading something about that before. I remember reading something about that before where they were talking about Jesus was not actually crucified on a cross, that he was crucified on a pole, and that all these people were not
That's
usually
Jehovah's
nailed,
Witness.
but tied simply to the top of the pole. They're just hanging by their hands, essentially, until they asphyxiate.
Exposure? Well, that's a Jehovah's Witness thing.
So
although I do
Jesus
believe they
just
think
hung out there for a couple of days.
He died.
Yeah,
of
that may be
boredom.
where I got it, because I read a lot of Jehovah's Witness crap. So
yeah,
maybe.
I heard recently Dan McLennan talk about that there's enough evidence, like archaeological evidence, that he showed some diagrams or depictions that it would have been a T-shaped cross.
Yeah,
cross.
So a capital T, not a lowercase t.
There you go.
Which would make a lot more sense, actually. Dan McClellan had expressed some interest in doing a collaborative effort with me. I'm wishing that will happen soon. I keep inviting. He said, "Yeah, we should do that," but just hasn't happened yet.
Well,
and I'm okay with him being a believer, because he's like the best kind of believer who actually evaluates, his own position.
Mm-hmm.
I got to respect that.
Oh yeah.
Oh, it's always so nice.
Yes. And then Matt White says, if the New Testament was true, it would be crucifact, not crucifixion. Okay, I got to share an anecdote with you. There was a debate between Bill Dembski and Christopher Hitchens that was done in Prestonwood Baptist Church here in Dallas. And the thing that surprised me was that, hands down, without question, Christopher Hitchens was our best debater. And my thought was, your champion is Bill Dembski? Seriously?
How many Scotch whiskeys? Like, how many whiskeys did Hitch have to have as a handicap? He would have to be so goddamn drunk he couldn't stand just to bring it within shooting range.
Like, Bill Dembski? I'm sure you guys can conjure something better than that. It was a brilliant thing to be in the room, to listen to the oration, because, Christopher Hitchens had such a commanding speaking voice. He was so brilliant to listen to in the room. I'm like, fuck, this man he's bigger than life. That was an incredible thing to see. But they had they had Bill Dembski as their champion. He wasn't even prepared for the debate. He read Hitchens' book and was trying to debate his book, and could not deviate from that to any of the subject matter that Hitchens was bringing up. And I'm sorry to say that this was my first opportunity to meet Christopher Hitchens, and I started to walk up to the stage to introduce myself and shake his hand. But then they started doing this this sermon where they, the whole point was that they were going to bring up both of these people and they were going to say, and I did not change my mind, because that's the whole game, right? Pretend that no amount of reason will ever affect you. And I just couldn't bear the sermon. I'm like, okay, I'll have another opportunity to meet Hitchens. I'll meet him at another time. And I walked out. Foolish choice. All right.
Oh, if I had a time machine.
Oh yeah, just one more note on the question about the JW stake thing. That's based on I don't know what it's the Greek, right? He was crucified or whatever. I don't know what the words are, but it's not going to be
Stauros,
the Hebrew hanged on a tree, right? Like the Gospels don't say that he was hung on a tree, right?
No, but they it is the word for crucifixion. I can pull up the.
Is it the same as what they said?
There's a reference
the thing is,
to the as the prophecies foretold kind of thing.
They definitely took the verse from Deuteronomy about being hanged on a tree, and cited it directly. I'm pretty sure.
That's unfortunate, because at this point we're still in the Hebrew Bible, so we're still speaking Hebrew, not Greek. So I don't, or Aramaic. So I have no idea if it's the same language that they used for when Judas Iscariot was hanged on a tree.
Oh, interesting. I think it's a different word there.
And I'm not quite sure if Israelites did
differentiate?
something similar to what the Romans were doing. Like it wasn't their death. It was, it was stoning or you were exiled. But
there was no death by hanging. There was only the body on the thing. Although we have here like the king is impaled, but it could have been the body.
Which is incidentally a fucking horrible way to die.
Is it possible that maybe he was just put on display as to set an example, but already dead? Not like that was the method of execution per se.
Yeah, I just realized it says something kind of funny in the JPS. So at sunset, Joshua had the corpse taken down from the stake, and it was left. Oh, I thought it said dying. It says left lying. Like, oh yes, Fed said it left dying at the entrance of the city gate. I was like, oh, the corpse was still dying, but no. Okay.
So if someone can pull up the specifically on what Aaron just asked about, like if they use the same word for when Judas hangs himself. Oh, hello, cat. Get the fuck out of here.
Well, it won't work because we're talking about the comparison between Hebrew and Greek.
Right. Yeah, but I'm actually curious if they use it there.
Yes, the Hebrew is definitely over here is literally hang on a tree, which is translated as various ways.
And I know that the Septuagint clarifies that it is a forked tree.
And it's very possible also, like the idea that the idea of hanging on a tree was used as I don't know what the word is, not a synonym.
Okay, so it's
but like
a forked tree. It's going to look like a capital Y instead of a capital T.
According to the Septuagint,
means that all the Christians are going to have to go out and get new jewelry.
Oh God, they're going to have to like the peace sign now. That would be deceptive.
Why for Jesus?
There's one.
I wonder if the cross symbol actually didn't develop from the actual torture device, but if it developed from the Cairo symbol.
I don't know. That's a debate for another time.
Yeah.
Because I'm going to need dinner at some point, so we probably
Yeah, and we're going to have to close this up soon because Lawrence has a video that's going to premiere. I think.
So let me finish.
Will you hurry the fuck up, dude?
Well, first there is one comment.
One comment.
Okay.
In the chat, not in the commentary. I have more.
Yeah, Matthew K said, "Shut up." Matthew K says, "Panel, why don't any Christians recognize that the cross that Yeshua would have been crucified on would have been X-shaped up until the mid-2nd century?" Well, now we brought it. Okay, is it a capital T? Is it a capital Y? Is it an X? Which letter would you like?
I think the Romans might have, liked all the letters.
And I should I should note origin again, and I saw one comment of it, and I was very interested in it about this is in homilies on Joshua 8:5. So you see that these things that follow truly pertain more to the truth of a mystery than that of history. For it is not so much that a piece of land is forever uninhabitable, but that the place of demons will be uninhabitable when no one will sin, and sin will not rule in anyone. Then the devil and his angels will be consigned to the eternal fire with the Lord Jesus Christ sitting as ruler and judge and saying to those who overcame before and afterward, come, blessed of my Father, take possession of the kingdom that was created for you by my Father. That's Matthew 25:34. But to the others he will say, go into the eternal fire that God prepared for the devil and his angels. That's in Matthew 25:41. And until he takes care of every soul with the remedies of he himself knows, and all Israel may be saved. Romans 11:26.
Yeah, the original fan fiction writer right there, everyone.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yep.
Oh yeah, you're not wrong.
Yeah, and just to be clear, the only commentary on the ancient Greek commentary is origin.
They honestly, that entire series does seem to quote from Original a lot. Like, yeah,
Well,
Original
I can't
Wow.
blame them. He's absolutely funny.
Yeah, that's
Out of
something.
his
The
fucking
Julian's
mind.
funnier.
Okay,
When did the origin live?
2nd century,
3rd century.
3rd century.
Well, that's when he was like most prominent. 3rd century. He may have been born in the 2nd.
Okay.
But it wasn't until the 4th century that the church got enough political power to start slaughtering left, right, and center. So, maybe in those days they weren't so stabby because they
Makes sense.
didn't have the reach.
Okay, so now we're entering into the next section, 30 to 35. So several commentators note that these verses do not fit with the chronological order of the chapter. Rashi, Kara, and Kimchi wrote that this event happened on the day they crossed the Jordan River, before the conquest of Jericho. These verses are placed after Joshua 9:2 in the Septuagint. Dozeman notes van der Meer's opinion that the interest of the Septuagint translator is to fashion, quote, a historically plausible rendering, end quote, of the problematic sequence in MT. He further writes, the discovery of 4Q Joshua A compounds the problem of context because it locates part of the ceremony at the Jordan River before the story of circumcision and the observance of Passover in Joshua 5 verses 2 to 12. Ulrich and Knut interpret the literary context of 4Q Joshua A to represent the oldest or original version of the story. They note a similar sequence in Josephus, Antiquities 5:16 to 20. Tov argues that the sequence in 4Q Joshua A represents a rewriting of the literary context that locates the ceremony later in Joshua. Nelson and van der Meer agree with Tov. The literary strategy of Joshua 3 to 8 favors the context of the ceremony in the MT and the Septuagint, since it provides the conclusion of the procession of the ark into the promised land at the mountains Ebal and Gerizim. The context indicates that the ceremony is not simply a response to the destruction of Ai in Joshua 8, 1 to 29, or even of Jericho in Joshua 6, but reaches back to the procession of the ark into the promised land that began with the crossing of the Jordan River. On verse 32, Joshua wrote on stones. Chazal in Mishneh Sotaf 7:5 and Peshitta wrote that these stones were the altar stones. While Butler, Dozeman, and Zakovitch support this identification, Ahituv and Nelson wrote that this refers to the stones who were coated with plaster in Deuteronomy 27 verses 2 and 4, with the latter suggesting that the writer assumes that the readers are familiar with the cited text and will understand that the stones of verse 32 are different from the stones of verse 31.
These are the stones that were brought up from not from the Jordan, right? By the 12 youths and picked up the stones and took them.
It seems like it would be, but it's like
at least
different
according to
from
that
those
tradition.
ones because they've got they make a big deal about it's an altar made of untouched stone that they haven't used any iron tools on.
So according to the tradition, it says that these are different. That there was an altar, and then there were 12 stones with writing on it. I think.
I mean, even in terms of the story, it sounds like they'd be different, right?
Yeah.
Well, according to that tradition, also this bit was at that time. This didn't happen after This happened before Jericho.
Oh, okay. So we're dodging around the bits of the story.
This whole section is chronologically out of order according to that. And it's interesting that the Septuagint puts it later. Takes a whole bunch of verses and just puts it in another chapter.
No. So about this, on the same verse, a copy of the law of Moses. According to Deuteronomy 17:18, the king of Israel must own a copy of the Torah, in Hebrew Mishneh HaTorah, and have it written before the Levitical priest. Dozeman writes that the reference to the Torah of Moses indicates the dependence of Joshua on the reference to this Torah in Deuteronomy. However, the two commands convey different meanings. He writes, comparison of Deuteronomy and Joshua highlights the anti-monarchic ideology of the author of verse 32 in reinterpreting Deuteronomy 17:18. The point of emphasis in Deuteronomy is that the king must have a copy of the Torah to curb the absolute power of the monarch. The presence of the Levitical priests as interpreters of Torah is meant to ensure that the king carries out the commands of the Torah in ruling the people, rather than exploiting power for his own benefit. The ceremony in Joshua is reinterpreted into the anti-monarchic rite with an even more egalitarian vision of authority. Kings have no legitimate power in the book of Joshua. The plot of the story is to eliminate all kings and their city-states from the promised land under the leadership of Joshua. This perspective is reflected in verse 32. Joshua leads the ceremony, but he does not represent a king. He kills kings. Nor does Joshua receive a copy of the Torah. Instead, the Torah is written publicly on the uncut stones of the altar before the Israelites. The symbolism of verse 32 is far removed from the qualified view of monarchy in Deuteronomy 17:18, where the power of the king is controlled by the Torah and held in check by the Levitical priests. In verse 32, no one human receives the copy of the Torah. The responsibility to follow the teaching of the Torah rests in the final analysis with all Israelites, both aliens and citizens alike.
Yeah, and for those that don't remember, one of the big things that would help us, define a post-exilic versus a pre-exilic author, or even like an exilic author, would be their view towards the monarchy.
Yeah, well, and it's also obviously in the Deuteronomistic authors the idea of not too much power to the king, because the priests have to have the greater power. And oh my God, mankind will never be free until the last king is strangled with the entrails of the last priest.
Yeah, I think the more later versions of the documentary prophecies, or whatever it's called now, are more happy to say that there is definitely a post-exilic finish to the entire.
That'd be something else, though. It wouldn't be.
Yeah,
that would be because documentary hypothesis, supplementary, those
supplementary.
Those are mostly concerned with the Torah.
Yeah.
But then
so
we're talking about
supplementary. I think
history stuff
combines the Deuteronomic history as well, I think. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And my final commentary, verse 33, Butler comments, the worship service meets all Deuteronomic requirements, having the ark and the Levitical priests at its center. The inclusion of strangers rests on a particular Deuteronomic concern. The stranger included anyone living outside his own clan and thus not protected by clan law. Thus, the ancestors were strangers in the promised land. For example, Genesis 12:10, 19:9, 21, etc. The Deuteronomic law viewed such strangers as economically underprivileged and provided special means of support for them, as seen in Deuteronomy 14:29, 16:11, and 14, 24:17, and 19-21, etc. Special protection and even privilege were granted them in Deuteronomy 1:16, 5:15, 24:17, etc. Their presence in the cult was assumed and commanded based on Yahweh's love for them in Deuteronomy 10 verses 18 to 19. Still, one of the curses facing a disobedient Israel was that the tablets will be turned so that citizens dependent upon strangers for livelihood. Deuteronomy 28 verses 43 to 44. For verse 33 here builds on the Deuteronomic understanding to assure the strangers a place within the cultic life of Israel. And again,
and in the next chapter, we find out where those strangers came from.
Yeah. As what?
And
Something other than cannon fodder?
and again, there are more comments from Origin, which I will summarize it because I don't think quoting them will be very very funny, but just summarization. The unhewn stones Joshua used to build an altar represents those who bear Christ's humility and gentleness.
See, if P-Town was doing this kind of shit, saying, "Oh, here's what Origin thought," I don't think any of us would have been like, "Oh, shut the fuck up, P-Town." Like,
and Origin thought the same shit.
Right? Yeah. Like, if he was just like citing Origin, that'd be something. I'd be like, "Hey, at least you're reading the Church Fathers."
I don't think he knows the Church Fathers existed.
I have 5 points that Justin Martyr also makes about the book of Joshua that are just crazy ridiculous. To me, it's just the confirmation bias that's behind all this. Like, for example, he says, just as Joshua led the people of God, so does Jesus. Just as Joshua distributed the inheritance, so does Jesus. Like, what did he do? Like, what inheritance? Like, what?
Well, it's
what involvement did you have?
It's the inheritance of the kingdom of God, right? But like,
of course,
yeah. But the thing is, like, they're not pulling these connections entirely out of their asses, because the way that the Jesus character is written in the Gospels is supposed to emulate those old heroes. He's supposed to emulate David in many ways. He's supposed to be like Moses, be like Joshua. He's supposed to be like those people. So, like, that's why so many people of the time who were like Jesus, the same, kind of preachers, were trying to emulate the people of those days. Like Josephus mentions, a good amount of those kinds of preachers, and he always notes the things that they were doing that were like Joshua or like Moses. Like, he specifically notes those parallels because
it's deliberate imitation.
Yeah.
To try and stir up fervor.
Just as Joshua told the sun to stand still in the sky, it did. So too, Jesus is the light of God who will provide light eternal for his people.
Okay, well, that's just fucking stupid.
Yeah, I was gonna ask about what humility and what was the second adjective given to Jesus?
Yeah.
Tomer?
What?
You said, what was the second adjective? The humility and something else? Fondness?
Humility and gentleness.
Gentleness. Like when he told that tree to die.
Oh, yes. Right. The Prince of Peace who came to bring a sword.
And check this one out. This is the last one. And this is all, by the way, from his dialogue with Trypho the Jew, or Trypho the Jew. Just as Joshua circumcised the Jews a second time, so too Jesus will circumcise his people with the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God.
Okay. That's okay. So they're putting together a lot of stuff there.
You're gonna circumcise with a sword?
Yeah. So the idea is that, like, cleansing with the sword is a big theme in some early Christian texts, and then the idea of circumcising the heart is also a big theme. So if they just left it at circumcise the heart, I'd be like, okay, you're an idiot, but sure, fine. But then they throw in that other stuff. Yeah, thanks.
Oh well, and it is the sword of his word that comes out of his mouth.
Isn't circumcising with a sword roughly equivalent to, deer hunting with an M1 Abrams tank?
Or, yes, completely fair.
Or a small tactical
missile. Religious people from doing it.
I just would like to remind you that that same Jesus who runs about it is the sword of his word that comes out of his mouth, a two-edged sword. So maybe he just really fucked up giving head.
Yeah, it's a funny mouth to penis connection there.
Or was it referencing Ehud
surgical
there?
instrument.
Or was it referencing Judges
Zombie
3 with
Jesus.
Ehud?
I am quoting the Bible. I swear to God, it is in there.
Some notes by Origin. So he also
Aaron, do you know
wrote.
this? You know this? What? How does Jesus give a hand job?
Oh yeah.
Okay. So Origin again. I'm just summarizing.
Sorry, Tom.
It's okay. It's okay. So he's writing. Joshua's writing upon the stones typifies Jesus writing on a new law upon human hearts. And the diversity of people assembled for the reading of the law represents the differing degrees of maturity within the church.
Okay.
And finally,
you have the adult priests and the.
Hey, why do priests baptize infants in the Catholic Church? They need some way to wash their sex toys.
So yeah. Finally, in Joshua's reading of the law, we understand that the law of Moses is rightly grasped only when we possess a spiritual conception of its contents, which is given through Jesus.
Jesus is the answer. Everything.
Yes, and I'm done with my commentary.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Joe.
I feel like there's like a difference in like the Jesus and what some of the Gospels and some of the others, or like but how it's in the Bible and how like Christians think about him. It's like, you know, did you throw the first stone? Asked Jesus calmly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know?
This actually was a running joke in seminary that if you did not know the answer to any given question on a test, you should always write down Jesus because you could be right and get it right. Get it.
Oh yeah, the old joke of the girl in Sunday school, and the teacher's she's talking about the animals in the ark, and she's trying to remember. Oh, the little one with the puffy tail and it eats nuts. What's it called? She's just having a moment, and the little girl's like, "It sounds like a squirrel, but I think the answer is Jesus."
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So I don't think we're going to be able to get through the next chapter.
We won't.
In the next 12 minutes?
No shot.
It's also an important story because it's the Gibeonites.
Right, yeah.
The deception of the Gibeonites, which is a very fun one.
And then after that, we have the one where Joshua makes the sun stand still, and that's gonna be fun.
Oh yeah,
that's fun as well.
Yeah, that's gonna be. Oh, that's very
Yeah, so I'm gonna share Lawrence's link one more time in the chat with everybody.
I beat you to it.
That's private chat.
I beat you to it.
I beat you to it. Okay, very, very good. All right, so everybody go and watch that.
Right.
And are we going to be picking up? We're going to do Joshua 9 then on Saturday.
Yes.
I
believe that.
Finally, we're doing
There's one more comment, but it's a visual gag from Matt White. Mary says to Jesus, "Stop biting your nails."
No, they left him in.
Okay.
Oh, does he have to pay extra for a mani pedi if he's getting all his nails done?
I've seen that cartoon. Jesus in the nail salon.
All right. Yeah, very proud of all y'all for being involved. Mark, I'm glad you still find time to do these. I really appreciate you being here. So just want to throw out a special invite to you being the next one.
Thank you,
Lawrence. Proud of you, man. And
hopefully at some point people will other organizers that aren't just like my buddies from around town we'll be like, hey, this is really interesting. Could you talk about this thing? That'd be kind of
well. Be careful what you wish for, because when I mentioned at the beginning of the show that first time that I went to do a speaking gig in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, I was doing speaking gigs every single month for 10 years.
Well then.
Until COVID. Yeah. So.
Well, hey, that's something. That'd be kind of cool, honestly. Like at least for a little bit, right?
Yeah, at least for a little bit. But the travel gets fucking expensive after a while. Even if they pay your honorarium, it's still fucking costly at some point. But
True.
Good to see you in the circuit. All right. See everybody on Saturday.
And join the Discord and go watch the thing. It's premiering in 9 minutes. So go.
Yes.
We already have the link shared. I'm going to be sharing it on Twitter, also on Facebook.
All right. Thank you, Arn.
All right.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Bye.